Greetings from Chicago and on Facebook and Facebook Live from Music Direct and musicdirect.com. I'm Bess Navarro. Welcome to another edition of Conversations from the Listening Room. Also, special thanks to our friends over at AudioQuest and Intervention Records for joining us as part of this broadcast. Good to have them on aboard. If you've never heard about Music Direct, here's your chance. Music Direct is a major retailer of fun, good audio products that you can find on our website at musicdirect.com or through the now iconic catalogs that you receive in our mailbox on a regular basis. If you'd like to find out more information about Music Direct, you're welcome to visit our website during this conversation. It's musicdirect.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for our weekly Soundbites emailer. Get to know the latest on new releases, as well as special order items, and of course, special deals. That's what Music Direct is all about. We've been doing it for more than 3.5 decades, and we have no plans to stop soon when it comes to bringing great music and great gear into your homes. On that note, we hope you're doing well during this unusual time. Of course, things have been happening in such breakneck speed that nobody really has any idea how to kind of pass the time, as it were, as I've talked to customers and people in our industry who have been wondering what's next. That's one of the reasons why when we started this program, it was an offshoot of a series of articles that were penned by my colleague Josh Bizarre that you can see in our news section at musicdirect.com. In that, listening in his listening room, and that of other commentators and people in our industry, they too have also looked at what is next as we get ready for what will be a pretty long time of lockdown and or the ability to get up and get around. Either way, we hope you do it with music and great gear. That's why we've also created this little offshoot of Conversations from the Listening Room, where we've actually talked to some of our industry friends along the way. And among those joining us for this conversation is Shane Bettner. Shane is no stranger to our industry, having written articles for The Absolute Sound and a number of other publications, but he's also maintained other great hats in this industry as Vice President for Marketing at AudioQuest and also the king of his own record label, in this case, Intervention Records. And I am pleased to have him join us live from his home in Gig Harbor, Washington. Shane, how are you, brother?
I am terrific. Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed that. Were you reading from a teleprompter? Because if you weren't, that's unfair that you can have that kind of recall and can just rattle that off. That sounded so professional. I feel like I'm on a radio show.
Well, those of us who have had broadcast experience, including public radio and an occasional on-TV deal, and a $52,000 student loan that's still being paid for, will help that make that kind of make that conversation possible. But thank you for that. Memorizing before on air. It's either that or we start sounding like college students and kind of going, "I'm talking to Shane. Is it Bettner?"
I want you to go full morning radio and have some horns and some like wacky stuff going on, ring some bells.
No, we're not going to do that. We're too well paid for that. So I don't think we're gonna walk that line. But it's a great idea. Maybe next time. So as we said before we went on air, number one, it's good to see you. Obviously, where you are up in the upper Northwest. Things are very, awkward, kooky, weird, great. You never know. How are you?
What, just because a part of Seattle started its own country?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That said, how are you doing on a personal level, and how has it shaped you in the first 30 days when this madness really started to take place?
Well, it's been a lot longer than 30 days at this point. So that's an interesting question. So I've been, fortunate enough, and I don't know, in some other ways, maybe unfortunate. I've been working from home for almost 20 years. So not a ton of my day to day changed, in terms of so I guess I was socially distancing before it was cool because, I work from home, just my dog, my cat, usually. So, for the first while there, I think, the biggest change for me was when the schools closed down. That means my kids were at home, and aside from, instead of having that clear shot, open shot during their school hours, it was like I was having to kind of manage a little bit of their day as well as my day. And I think, for myself and the families that I know and people, that's really one of the biggest challenges is, what this means to our kids and having them home, having all of us bunched up together, probably more than all of us would prefer. So, that was really the biggest change. And of course, travel and everything else. But one of the things that we found, at AudioQuest as a group is we managed to discover, I hate to use like a kind of, overused term, but we kind of discovered a lot of new efficiencies. We were using Zoom and video conferencing before, but it just started to become an ingrained habit. So people that I work with and on a daily basis who I'd be doing, emails and texts or, Slack chats with, it became a lot more frequent to just send them a link and say, will you jump on Zoom and I want you to, I want to share the screen with you and look at this thing. Because we've always been a little bit geographically disparate as a group, right? Like just within, my, marketing group, Bill Lowe is the chief marketing officer of AudioQuest. I work for Bill. Bill's in Newport Beach and Irvine sometimes, around the world a lot of the rest of the time. My other close colleague, Stephen Mejias, is based in New Jersey. I'm up in Washington State. We've got our graphics team that's based down in the office in Irvine. So we were already all over the place. And it actually, when we got more in the habit of jumping on Zoom and being able to share our computer screens, it actually enhanced our creativity because we weren't just sending emails about art or projects or things like that. We did a lot more direct collaboration in real time. And that ended up extending to education projects. I mean, we've done a number of our, Zoom webinars with, Music Direct, for example. I mean, I did one with on behalf of Lyra with Jonathan and Stig. And all of those processes to create that content, we were actually working together in some ways, really more closely than we had before. So it really, I think when you shake the box that hard, there are some good things that come out of it. There are a lot of opportunities to look at everything you're doing and how you're doing it and kind of reimagine it. And we definitely did some of that. So I would say that, socially within my social circles, like, yes, I don't have as many opportunities here in town to actually be with friends when I'm off of work and things like that, go out to restaurants and some of the things, that I used to do. But in terms of work and collaboration and that aspect of it, there are a number of significant ways in which it's actually been enhanced by virtue of rethinking things and just by the necessity of having to do things a different way. I think this ability that we have to communicate through video and other things, the way that, it's fantastic when our amazing sales team gets out in the field and gets with you guys, right? That's an amazing experience. We all know that I've been a part of many of those, and I love that interaction. But I will say, I also love the fact that we've done these webinars. They've been recorded, and they can be reshown and reviewed. Like there isn't just a takeaway. It's like, hey, the guy who was out that day can go watch this whole hour-long presentation. That's amazing. Somebody who was there can go back and watch one of Isaac Markowitz's presentations or Garth Powell's and refresh, during a downtime. So there have definitely been some opportunities to create. And I think all of us are coming away with this with things that we're going to keep permanently, that are positive. So I'm not going to get, say that, I wish all this would have come about in a different way. I wish it wouldn't have been a pandemic that forced us to do this, because nobody, wishes for people to be sick or for any of these terrible, dangerous things to happen. But, anytime you look and re-examine and you come away with things that work that you weren't doing before, at the end of the day, that's going to strengthen us moving forward, like and more importantly, our closest and most important relationships.
Yeah, no. And of course, Music Direct, having been one of the longest serving retailers of the brand from our company's inception more than 3 odd plus decades ago, is definitely a testament to that. We certainly have enjoyed what is quite possibly one of the healthiest relationships when it comes to us offering such a wide portfolio of products to our customers, whether it's through our traditional catalog or, of course, through our website at musicdirect.com. It's just been a grace. And to have your team, like Isaac and so forth, being at the ready.
Bill himself.
Yeah.
Bill did a great hour with you. Garth has been on here, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
No, we're always thrilled to have that kind of resource available to us and to our customers when they watch great video like this or content. Let's talk a little bit about Shane, the dude. Shane, of course, San Francisco
The
Bay
dude
Area
box.
kid. Doing what any child would be doing, living out there in his day. Then all of a sudden, the audio bug starts hitting you. How did that transition from Bay Area kid to Shane Bettner, writer, marketer, and guy at AudioQuest begin to take shape?
So that's yeah, that's fascinating. So I think it's interesting. I mean, I've got a variety of friends. I just turned 50 this year. I've got a variety of friends who could skew, a decade or a little, I started having children late. So a lot of the parents I get to know and stuff end up being younger than me. I think I grew up in the last era when there were hi-fi or stereo stores kind of on every corner. I mean, I grew up in Fremont, California. People today, it's actually now kind of been annexed into Silicon Valley. It's in the East Bay. It's north of San Jose. So for a while it wasn't really considered part of the valley, but people know now. There used to be a car plant there, and that's where Elon Musk planted Tesla. The Tesla plant or factories in my hometown of Fremont, California. Um, and so, but when I grew up, it really was a town. I mean, so it was a quiet suburb. It was a great place to grow up. It's the kind of place I grew up in that era where, we were just, planned communities. We could walk or ride bikes everywhere and do all this stuff. And honestly, within a 10 minutes bike ride off the top of my head at this moment, I could think of at least three different stereo stores. So when I was a kid my mother was a little younger when I was born. So, that started my exposure to pop and rock music. I was very close with an uncle of mine who grew up. He really ended up feeling more like a big brother to me. And he was really an early influence because, he had what was probably a rack system stereo, but like he was kind of a serious dude, right? Like he had all this stuff that to me looked exotic and looked cool, even though it was really, it was early 70s vintage stereo gear. But he was one of those dudes who bought records, played them once, recorded them to cassette, then was playing the cassettes in the car. He always had a cool car. I mean, I'll never forget. He got a in the late 70s. He had a bitchin' Camaro. It had T-tops. He bought a Super Boss aftermarket stereo to play those cassettes. We did a lot of road trips. So um, that all of that, like, and when I grew up, like when you were a kid, there were two things that were kind of a landmark for you: getting your first car and getting your first stereo. Like those were really big deals. And I'm just not sure that that's true anymore. But I just think that I grew up in the last era where like that was a thing you did. It was a cool thing to have a stereo in your home. My family had a big console system, with a turntable in the top where you'd lift up the lid. The speakers were all built into this ginormous piece of furniture and everything. So I mean, I can't say other than my uncle, my uncle and to some extent my mother were definitely the people that like they were always listening to music. It was always 60s, 70s, and then 80s rock and pop. Um, but my family, there was always, there was music around, but he was the one who really had interesting and eclectic tastes and gave me, tastes and bands that like I wouldn't have discovered any I mean, I know we're going to touch on my record label later, but the Flying Burrito Brothers, I heard the first time I heard those guys was on road trips with my uncles. So like I always knew who they were. And when I would say something like people go, "Who? What?" I go, "Well, you never heard of them, but like the Eagles wouldn't exist if it weren't for them. Like they did the country rock thing before, before the Eagles kind of perfected it and turned it into gold, right?" So and my uncle's a guy who knew who Graham Parsons was, but and he got me into ZZ Top, and then he got into some really eclectic, country music stuff that, is a little off the beaten path. So um, I always had that passion, and I would say this, and I mean, my different parts of my career touch on all of it, but I've always been, not just into music, but I've always been deeply, deeply involved and passionate about movies and home theater as well. So the two hobbies for me have always gone very hand in hand, and I think that led to me always being more of a person who built a home theater and a home movie experience around a pretty serious two-channel music listening experience. So the two things to me have always gone hand in hand, but with with two-channel hi-fi taking the lead, so to speak, and the
Well,
rest of it being tucked around.
so then it turns into Sean Bittner, audio
A career.
guy, loves his music, and then suddenly it's Sean Bittner, writer for the Absolute Sound. Transitioning over to that, one must have had to think about, do I have the skill set to be able to take all those little passions and make it into cogent paragraphs so that an audiophile audience can truly dig it? What were your experiences like in doing that?
Well, that's funny. I mean, in the late 90s, I was in the tech industry. I was a network administrator, and I was probably on a path to become a CTO or like, that would have been the pinnacle. I don't know if I would have, eventually made it that far, but I think I had, I was still deeply involved. I was very involved in home theater at that point in time as a hobby. That was kind of just starting to, I shouldn't say just starting, but it was when it was really starting to blossom. From two-channel to surround sound, laser disc, um, you know, discrete 5.1 channel surround sound and all of that. And so I was, a little ahead of the curve on that stuff. And I started doing some writing part time for somebody who had a website dedicated to that. That got the attention of another magazine that was dedicated to that specialty at the time called Widescreen Review, and that was actually my first exposure to writing in print. But to answer your question, it's interesting. I never had a job or anything that involved long form writing, but I'd always been an avid reader. I'd always done, English and creative writing and things like that were always kind of in my bailiwick, from high school through, the years of college that I did and things like that. And yes, like to answer your question, it turned out I had a couple of abilities. I could speak and communicate very clearly, and I don't have a fear of public speaking. And I also don't have a fear of embarrassing myself in public. So it never occurred to me that I couldn't just start writing for a website and start putting my opinions out there and have them be valid. And then fortunately, people who were in a position to publish my work agreed with me. And it just, it just kind of took off from there. And so what you're referring to is you remember my work from the Absolute Sound. The reality of that is at that time, Tom Martin and the folks that still own the Absolute Sound to this day had a sister publication dedicated to specialty home theater called The Perfect Vision. My day job, so to speak, was being the video editor of The Perfect Vision, and running the video review section and the video coverage section. It was almost like a magazine within the magazine, because Robert Harley was the editor in chief, but his expertise was heavy on the audio side. Mine was a bit more on the video side. So, after working with him and his team on a freelance basis, he tapped me to say, look, I think it'd be great if you kind of were the video editor and really, ran the video section of the magazine. It's kind of not quite a magazine within a magazine, because it was all through Robert. But, that was really my first, not just a writer and reviewer, but, I was an editor of my own little chunk of that. And then I was moonlighting for the Absolute Sound just because two-channel audio was enough of a passion that I really wanted to do that. And even some of my early work, I know as we were, kind of preparing for this, you were asking me about, a little bit about, some of what my sensibilities were as somebody who was trying to communicate to an audience about audio and being a reviewer and things. And within the home theater world, the thing that was interesting to me, so the first project that I did for the Perfect Vision, that was a really big project, was they wanted me to do this survey at the time of 20 DVD players or something like that. And it was it was a pretty daunting task, but I'm pretty well organized, and I felt up to the challenge, and but the hook for me was that I looked at all these things, and my take on it was this: the video, more or less, was the same. I mean, they were the same chipsets. A number of them used the same drive mechanisms. I mean, that's where a lot of the similarities were. But where you could find some really substantial difference were how different companies treated the analog audio output section. Were they serious about these devices as CD player? They were starting, universal players were starting to become a thing at that point. So if you remember, I mean, one of the first things that I covered as an audio video journalist was the DVD audio versus SACD format war. And of course, the hilarious part of that is that MP3 won that war. And yeah, we were all in the sidelines wondering whether it's SACD or DVD audio. And meantime, the public just went with neither and went on about their business, and we all had to catch up to computer audio.
I can't count the number of times when I had to read your articles to see what was going to be my next player, because I was
like,
I was fighting Universal players. I was like,
yeah,
everybody had a different shtick going on, and
yeah, and that was it, right? And what I found, and what I thought was a hook, and I think some people responded to, is they did sound dramatically different as CD players. The way that they handled the SACD or DSD layers of a dual of an SACD disc were different. Some of them, there was this talk about whether they converted to PCM or whether it was pure DSD and all that. So, I was really interested in audio. So even through my, home theater and video coverage, that was always an area of focus for me. And, and it always remains so. I mean, throughout my career, I spent a lot of time, ironically, on the home theater side of the business, including, I think almost 5 years as the editor-in-chief of Home Theater Magazine before it became Sound and Vision. But, I was fortunate enough that, within that group, Michael Fremer worked within that group. So Michael Fremer used to write reviews for Home Theater Magazine when I was the editor there, writing about audio video receivers and amplifiers and talking about sound quality. So I never lost that focus. And, anybody, it's funny. I mean, you see a poster of Apocalypse Now sitting behind me. That's a movie that was, to this day is one of those sonic tour de forces as a home theater buff, both in terms of the score. Anybody who hears that movie, the first thing they think of is Wagner. The Ride of the Valkyries, as the helicopters fly in, and then the amazing, sonic spectacular that is. And that to me is just, that's that movie, Walter Murch. That's where the term, sound designer came into play as the work. It used to be called sound editing or sound effects editing, and Walter Murch did such an amazing job with the sound in that movie that they made up a new term, sound designer. Like, this is beyond, the terms that we have. And I think to me that, perfectly illustrates that marriage of what, the visual and sonic experience, for movies, audio, and home theater, they all come together in that.
Well, that's obviously a great bio, and of course, listening to that, one wonders how you managed to get yourself into our side of the coin as AudioQuest. But I also want to sidebar this a little bit by asking you about what made you think you could be a record label tycoon. You launched Intervention.
Tycoon. I like earlier you said King of Intervention Records, and I thought, I have got to get a new business card.
I think one of the things when I started to see the Intervention label launch was, okay, yet again another reissue label. But when I started to see the inventory of titles that were coming through the chute, I'm going, ooh, this one I need to have. Ooh, this one I need to have. Ooh, I need to have this one. It's really been a great curation of titles that you've been putting together. What drove you to roll that label out into the public consciousness?
The consensus of people around me seems to be mental instability. The short answer, if you could pick two words,
sure, so, whatever.
So, I've been with AudioQuest twice. As Bill Lowe, our founder, puts it the best, that I took a sabbatical, which I like because it always suggests that I took a break, but that I was always going to come back. But my AudioQuest's, longtime product development guru and ears and everything else, Joe Harley, who you had on one of these shows, is a very, very dear friend of mine. Through him, I got to know Ron Rombach. And those were the two principles of Music Matters Jazz, which is that amazing reissue label dedicated to doing the Blue Note catalog. So during my first tenure at AudioQuest, I was fortunate enough to tag along with Joe to mastering sessions and meet Kevin Gray and talk to Ron a lot and learn, how you restore art, because you look at these things and it's not just the album. You open up these beautiful gatefold jackets and you're like, this isn't just a record reissue. Like, this is an archive, this is an archive quality release of, and so I started to learn, like, okay, this is not a normal thing. How do you make this? How does this happen? How does the art get restored? Who prints these jackets? Who does the center labels? Like, who's, who do you work with at the pressing plants? And the short of it is, those guys just introduced me to all the people they work with. And I just started having this crazy idea because, again, I'm 50. I was closer to 40 at the time, when I first started thinking about this. And the bottom line is, I look at the reissue market and I said, I'm seeing a market that is serving heavily the rock and roll cat, because I'm a rock and pop guy. I like all kinds of music, but like near and dear to my heart is really rock and pop and some country rock and stuff like that. But I was looking and seeing that from the 50s through the 70s, like that market is nailed. Like there's a lot of great labels. I mean, you guys have got Mobile Fidelity. There's a lot of people mining that territory and doing amazing stuff. But I was just finding there was so much stuff that I totally loved. That was the soundtrack of my early youth, my early 20s and things like that. And I'm like, where's the label that's going to treat this music like Music Matters treats a jazz release? And that was really kind of what started was I just looked and I'm like, there's a lot of stuff slipping through the cracks here. And I think, there might be room for somebody to do some stuff that other labels aren't. And so, from the get-go, I mean, I had a list of go-tos. I mean, my first batch of titles included Jerry Rafferty. I didn't know that he actually had a different band. In fact, I think that song shows up on some Jerry Rafferty compilations with Baker Street and all the other stuff. So it was in the 90s that I found out about Steeler's Wheel. But then also I'm like, why in the hell hasn't somebody done Everclear? Those two albums sold millions of copies apiece. That's a great band. So, Joe Jackson,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, in determining what you do and how you do it. A lot of people told me I was nuts for touching Joe Jackson because you could find all those records in the $3 bin. And I said, well, I think Joe's recordings are good enough and his music is great enough. I think there are people out there who don't just want a $3 record that sounds pretty good. I think there are people out there who want a definitive sounding copy that's dramatically, that's 100% analog, cut by Kevin Gray. I think there's people out there that would love to know and get something that replicates the jacket of the original, the very first press UK records that came out that had a textured front cover in black and white and then just had those sharp shoes. The shoes on that jacket have their own credit on the back of the record, Shoes by Dennison or something like that, right? And so it was this black and white textured matte finish, and then just the shoes are bright white. And I'm like, that's the kind of thing, that's what I want. I want one, in today, the thing I learned from Music Matters is all of this is boutique. I can get my stampers replaced every 500 copies. So every LP is totally pristine. There's no hot stamper. There's no, hey, I got lucky. I didn't just get this used record. I got one that sounds really good. Mm-hmm. All of them, 100% uniform, great sound. Every pressing sounds amazing. I thought that people would want that and want the kind of attention to detail on the art and the jacket and the whole experience. You were talking about, oh, there's so many record labels. I agree. I always kind of said like, hey, this record, this is a record label by one of us, meaning, an audiophile who loves rock and pop for all of us. And I also, my other kind of tagline that has stuck a little bit more is, archive quality LPs of the music we love. And by we, it's like, we can all pick that. But like I said, I saw a whole era of my music that just hadn't been seriously addressed in the reissue market. There's a lot of reissues, as that are just cranked out there, but putting the kind of attention to detail on Matthew Sweet's great catalog. Billy Squier.
Yeah.
Nobody touched Billy Squier in a serious way since the old MoFi did it in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So I really thought that there was, that there was some room to operate there
I
and
will
do some
say
interesting things.
I will say that listening to some of your stuff, including the Joe Jackson catalog, which I'm a huge fan of, uh, one got the sense that when you pulled it out of the shrink wrap and you felt that that quality jacketing, that you were taking a great deal of painstaking effort, much as you've described in your lessons learned from work, looking at the Music Matters series of product as well.
Mhm.
But I think where you also touched perfectly on it is it's music of a generation. It's music of a specific, a genre that, for the most part, really gives music lovers like myself and yourself a chance to really relive the good stuff of what happens when you put a really good remastered copy of a title, properly pressed and with great low problem rates and so forth because of the number of times you're stamping a record to such great
Yeah.
heights that it demands attention. And I think that's really one of the great bonuses of that.
Well, and the other thing that I believe in and I'm very passionate about and have been from the get-go is transparent sourcing. And what I mean by that is when I buy a record, what I would like to know on the product detail page, on the sticker, I moved it from the hype sticker that's on the poly bags around the records to I'm starting to put the sourcing information actually on the jacket art. But what I want to know every time I buy a record is I want to know what was the source you used? Was it a tape? Was it a master tape? Was it a safety copy? Like, what was it?
You've come into AudioQuest, you're working a little bit, you leave, you come back. How did
Mhm.
that get to that point?
So, when I had left, I was starting the record label. My children were quite a bit younger. And, my wife and I were at the point where, honestly, we were going to have to hire a nanny to start getting our kids to and from and running around and everything. And we were just in a position where I could take that break and do a bunch of that myself. So my wife had and still has this incredible business. She's a super boss, IT infrastructure consultant. And I really had an opportunity to be at home, take care of the kids, start a record label. I helped out Vandersteen Audio with some marketing and communications, helped them build a new website. I helped Brinkman Audio. Like I did a bunch of small part-time things, but really just spent a ton of time doing all that stuff that my kids needed me to do until they got a little bit older. And then it was like, okay, if I'm going to, kids are, kind of more into their own thing. They're a little older. Like if I'm going to get back in the workforce, I got to do it before, too much time passes and before time passes me by. And I just got really, both times that, you were talking a little bit earlier about me leaving the journalism side of audio and video and, jumping the fence to the manufacturing side. I will tell you, I've just been incredibly fortunate in both of those times because I really didn't want to just go work for any company selling widgets. I'd been using AudioQuest since the early 2000s. It was just, what made sense to me sonically, like from very early on. And as a reviewer, my God, I mean, I had so many different brands sending me truckloads of cables all the time. And I would listen and I'd go, thanks. I'd put my AudioQuest back in. I'd just kind of go, that's the way I love it. I love my system to sound. That's the way I love for it to make me feel. And so when I went out into the workforce, both times when I went to that side of the fence, I didn't just want to work for any brand. There were a few of them. I really wanted to work for a company whose products I use every day and that I genuinely love and appreciate. And I just can't, I just have been fortunate enough that, Bill was there for me the first time and it ended up being a really terrific fit. And then when it was time for me to come back to the workforce, that it's just I was just so fortunate. AudioQuest had an opening. They really wanted somebody who'd be based in Irvine, so it took a little bit of convincing that I was the right person, even though my geography wasn't right. Being up in Washington. But again, in today's world with video conferencing and screen sharing and everything, I'm just really fortunate. Bill believed in me. believed in what I could bring to the company, and gave me a chance to end my sabbatical and come back into the fold. So it's just been terrific.
That's terrific. Of course, in your tenure, the company's growth has been very exponential, welcoming Garth Powell, ushering in a new era of product product category in the power line products, including his line conditioners, and of course many of those power cords that we now sell in en masse over at Music Direct and musicdirect.com. You've also entered into the land of digital products, most notably with the now famous Dragonfly product. Uh, I am the proud owner of a Dragonfly Red. I update it on a regular basis. It is my safe cycling companion when I'm trying to do my workouts and so on and so forth here in Illinois. But you've also been lucky to become a distributor of sorts with the introduction of Lyra cartridges to your fold, even though it's been around for a long, long time. That said, and in the time that we have, those are unique symmetries, and yet you also have the challenge of making sure that customers like ourselves and our end users, who visit us at musicdirect.com, have to have a bit of a footprint on that. That must be pretty intense for you to work with as you try to get those brands to market.
Yeah, but it's a really natural fit. So my first tenured AudioQuest is when we did the launch of the original Dragonfly, and that's when we took the distributorship for North America over for Lyra. So and I'd known Jonathan and Stig before that, and then I was I was an integral part of the team that did the original Dragonfly launch. And Garth had started just before the end of my first tenure. But again, I had already known Garth. And, the other thing, it's interesting, I joked for the first couple of years after I left AudioQuest that I actually saw some of the people, and especially Bill, more often than I did when I worked there. Because I didn't leave the industry and I was still going to trade shows and we'd still have dinners together and things like that. But, in terms of these different, sort of product verticals, I mean, these are all relationships that span decades. AudioQuest relationship with Lyra and Jonathan and Stig goes back to the 80s. AudioQuest relationship with Garth on a personal level goes back as well. And I think the thing that, so that relationship is very natural. And it's interesting. I actually am along with Alistair Patrick in the inside sales and service part of the Lyra business. I'm the direct interface between Lyra and AudioQuest. At this point in time, I've got a tremendous relationship with those guys. As we've discussed, I'm a big time analog guy, to say the least. So like that world makes a lot of sense to me, and we get along really well, and we serve the brand and its customers and its dealers really well. And it's part of the job I enjoy immensely.
So,
but in terms of Dragonfly and Power and Garth, I think the things that they have in common is that while those look like departures, and certainly were to an extent for a quote unquote cable company to step out into these areas, I think the thing that we said when we launched the original Dragonfly is the product itself had to answer the question, why is AudioQuest doing this? And Dragonfly answered that question very emphatically. It created an entire category of these stick size, DAC things. And to this day, I mean, we're still the leader in that space. I mean, they're truly mobile. They're small enough to take anywhere. You can connect them to mobile devices. I mean, we call them the gateway drug, because it's not a product it works for audiophiles because it punches so far out of its weight class. I mean, if you connect up a mini to, RCA cable to that and put it into a Sirius 2-channel dedicated stereo system, it can pull the pants off of a lot of other DACs and give them a pretty good spanking, way out of its price point, regardless of whether you're talking, Dragonfly Black, Red, or the new Cobalt. They really punch out of their weight class.
So
but the thing that I love is,
let's talk about the Cobalt while we have a minute. This only just arrived within the past 12-ish months, and it already became a runaway hit. As I said earlier, I'm Brett. I'm holding on to my Dragonfly Red, as though it were my lifeblood, because I'm now hearing more information. Yet on the Cobalt, when we listen to it it drives more audio quality than any other product that I've listened to in its class. And yes, you talk about the fact that it was a small little stick, a little USB stick that started out to really become the gateway drug. Why do you think that the Cobalt is doing more to advance the question of accuracy and musicality in a product like that?
Well, there are certainly technical reasons for that in terms of the musicality, which is a piece that I would speak to directly, because that's what I feel. I mean, I think red is just black and red are both tremendous. Cobalt to me takes an extra step. It does have a bigger, more robust feel to it. It feels more muscular. But the thing that I respond to the most as a listener and as somebody who my reference is always what does my big 2-channel altar feel like, because that to me is where I decompress and that's where, my troubles melt away and where I'm just relaxed and immersed in the music. Cobalt goes farther than that. And I think a part of it, I think the journey of digital audio that we've all taken as an industry is that time domain phenomena is increasingly important. And the digital filtering that's in Cobalt uses a slow roll filter that is more correct in the time domain. And that to me just has a very noticeably different feel. It's not that the edges round out a little bit, they're not quite as sharp. You don't just get the outlines, the colors fill in a little more fully and with a little more textured shading and things like that. And, I'm trying to put these into terms, but for me, it just feels and sounds more relaxing. And it makes me, what I like in cables, power products, you name it, I like it when it doesn't feel like gear, when it just feels like an organic musical experience. And there's a lot of different ways to put that into words, but for me, it's just got a different feel about it. I mean, I could say hi-fi terms, and they're certainly there in terms of, fuller bass and mid bass. I think that's where some of that robustness and that rich thing comes from, that rich sound. But, for me, what it really comes down to is does it put me in a space where I'm just not thinking about the stuff and I'm just feeling the music in a way that's more immediately emotionally connected? And does that happen more often?
Yeah.
And with Cobalt, for me, unequivocally does. It's
Yeah,
just a
no,
better transport in that way.
I agree with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that one of the great spectacles about the Cobalt when it was first introduced was it has a lot more muscle under the hood, but also at the time when you listen to it, whether it's with in-ear headphones as I do, or the big boys where it needs a little bit more power and impedance management, the Cobalt still manages to push signal through in such a way that anybody who has a really good pair of headphones and wants to hear definitive stuff, whether it's
Yeah.
MQA or otherwise, will not be in the slightest bit disappointed. And I think that's great.
But
Now, go ahead.
the thing that I love about the Dragonfly line is that to people who are non-audiophiles, and I've had this experience many, many times, talking to people on airplanes, when they see it and they ask me, "What is that thing? What do you have connected to your phone?" Or whether it's people at a social get together asking me what I do and what Audioquest does, and I talk about Dragonfly. It's just as simple as saying, "Well, hey, you probably listen to music on your computer or your phone." They go, "Yeah, of course I do." Okay. Well, the chipsets and the components that are in your phone and in your computer, they're not purpose built for that. They didn't put a lot of time and attention and money in that. You connect your audio through a Dragonfly, it sounds better. Everyone gets it and they're intrigued and they say, "I'd like to really try that.
Yeah.
How much does it cost?" And you tell them and they go, "Oh, I'd check one of those out." You know,
That reminds me,
that simple.
I have to send one to my brother in the south suburbs. I've been meaning to do that. So, Manny, if you're watching, I'm sorry. Um,
They, they do make a great gift.
yes, they they make a great gift. We only have a minute or two left here. Final thoughts. I mean, I think what we've gained together, despite the video hoo-ha, is a great understanding about you. This will be your chance to get on the soapbox. There are those of us, well, maybe not me, but there are those who go by the conventional wisdom that all wire is the same. All wire is, just a series of little copper running a signal, and yet you and I because of our constant training through people, whether it's my colleague, our mutual colleague Rick Blair, who comes to our office on a regular basis, to Garth and even Bill coming to the office and giving their very special one-on-ones on this subject. It's clearly not the case. And I think what we look at from AudioQuest's perspective is we've designed these cables to produce a full effect of the musical experience. What is your feeling on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, our longstanding philosophy is to do no harm. So, I mean, our constant, the goal that we're chasing is to make cable sound to be as sonically invisible or not there as possible. Sonically invisible, that's a funny term, but the bottom line is to do the least amount of harm. We've always had this wonderful graphic that shows a sheet of music with panes of glass in between, and that's the bottom line, is that the best that any cable or any component can do is cause the least amount of distortion to the signal possible. So we don't start telling people, a bill of goods that our products are going to make magic. We just say that we do the least harm possible, and we go from there. And I think the most dramatic demonstration of that, and the most accessible, is the Bill Lowe's original, what we lovingly call the Boombox Demo. Which really breaks down a lot of the preconceptions that people have. It's very simple. It's where you take a boombox with detachable speakers, which is as modest can be, and you show people that they can hear the difference between speaker cables. And the magic thing that does is it breaks those two common misconceptions, which are, geez, I don't have a golden pair of ears on my head, so I wouldn't know the difference. And two, my stereo isn't good enough anyway, so, why should I do this? People hear that you can hear the cable on a boombox, and they go, oh, it just completely melts, that whole experience away. And that's an experience that we've just, shared with people time and time again. And we don't, it's interesting, but language kind of defines, your framing and how you approach and how you communicate to people. But, we don't refer to things as demo or demonstration or things like that. We call it a shared listening experience, or an SLE. And another big part of that is that we encourage people. We don't try to provide their opinions for them or assign their opinions to them. We play things, we let them hear these things, and we ask them what they think. And it's one of the most amazing things that I enjoy the most, especially when I have the time and I get out in the field and hear from people at dealers or consumers, is I love it when people put it in their own words. Because you always invariably hear something new and different, about the experience. But the experience is very real, and, we've devised some really simple ways to do that. HDMI cables. People don't even think of HDMI as an audio cable, but it sure as heck is. Mm-hmm. And, we've had these amazing experiences going and playing, not just one HDMI cable where they can hear difference, but kind of stepping up an entire line where they can hear that the higher the silver content gets, the more and more the less distortion there is, and the more the sound quality improves. And, one of my favorite stories, going to a store, we have such an amazing sales team of professionals, and they're just, they can put up with, nothing holds them back from getting through the SLE and getting people engaged and involved. And one of my favorite stories, we were at a store, there was a 20-something, very young 20-year-old kid. It was 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning, because we were getting in before the store opened, right? And this kid I could literally see the imprint of the carpet that he'd been sleeping face down on probably minutes before that was still on his face. He's drinking a Red Bull and, trying to get himself, back up in the morning. And 20 minutes later, he's hearing the differences between HDMI cables on a television set and offering his own descriptors and talking about what he's hearing and just being kind of blown away. And, that for me was just, that was in my first go around at AudioQuest. I spent a lot of time on the road with our field team, because it's just such an amazing educational opportunity for me. And that's another one of my favorite stories. It's a cable that people don't necessarily think of in audio terms, and a 20-something-year-old with a brutal hangover and a rug burn still on his face, not only heard it, but got excited about it and responded in kind.
Why does that vision Oh my heavens, that's a pretty intense visualization and a great way
Tough
to
one to
end.
follow up, isn't it? You
Yeah,
you said that was my finale, so I really just I gave it everything I had. I really wanted to go out
oh, we're gonna
on a
we're
high
gonna
note.
we're gonna roll with that, and we're gonna end on that. But not before I take this opportunity to thank you personally and for all of your gang over at AudioQuest. It's been a pleasure having all of you on screen with us, Joe, Bill, and of course you. And representing AudioQuest has been terrific, and I'm deeply appreciative of you joining us for this conversation. So thank you so much for A, being up so early, and B, being able to work with us through these unusual times and, in this case, technical issues. But thank you
I,
so much.
you know,
I'm
well, and
thrilled.
thank you. And like I said, Music Direct's got a place in my heart. Just by the sheer number of times I've been out there over the years. So it's probably a disproportionate number of visits I've made out there versus other places. And apologies to everybody else, but the feeling's mutual. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.